forward, we are coming to you with our November book club pick. And with me is Emma, of course, and Jess. And we are here today to talk about The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. We are coming to you live from the 23rd floor of the Penguin Random House offices. So if you hear the coffee brewing and people chatting, that's just our office life. So we're glad you're here with us. And I think we loved what we did last time, which was kick it off with a few questions from you guys about who we are. We want you to know who we are. So Jess, I'm going to throw it over to you. You've got some questions from our Facebook group.
Yeah. Thank you all for asking some really interesting questions about us and what we do. So the first question I want to ask is, what's the first book you remember reading or had read to you?
Yeah. This is tough. I have a lot of snippets of different books, but I have a major memory of Make Way for Ducklings being read to me.
A great one.
I have a lot of cousins that live in Boston, and in Boston there are actually duckling sculptures. And so we always go make a pilgrimage to do the ducklings. But yes, I remember being read Make Way for Ducklings in a whole pile of kids with my cousins.
That's so funny because I hadn't thought of this, but when you started saying that, I strongly remember reading Blueberries for Sale.
Oh.
And is that the one called Time of Wonder?
Yes.
Where they row the boat to get the spark plugs and eat ice cream?
I have no idea, truthfully.
Someone's going to know and send me an angry message.
Write us
but
a comment.
Yeah.
I remember being in kindergarten. I don't know if this was the first time I was reading by myself, but it's the first thing I remember. And we had our free time or whatever, and everyone was playing with a bunch of toys, and I went to the bookshelf and I grabbed a very hungry caterpillar and I sat on this rickety bench, and I just remember reading and having this moment of realization that I actually wasn't just repeating things I've heard and actually understanding what was on the page.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that was the first time I did that, but that's what's in my memory.
There's no greater feeling, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea what the first book I read by myself is, or even I don't know, it's all jumbled together because when I was really little, and actually through most of my childhood, my dad would read aloud to me every single night.
Aww.
And we read hundreds of books together. But I remember specifically reading The Hobbit together and how scared I was of Gollum.
He's scary. So.
Yes, I mean, I think if I read it again today, I would still get that thrill. But as a probably 7-year-old, I was terrified, and my mother was like, "What are you doing to our child?"
I remember the first time I fell sort of in love with a character. I had a major crush on Encyclopedia Brown.
Hell yeah.
Which, if you don't remember Encyclopedia Brown, he basically has this memory where he can remember all these crazy facts. He's so smart.
And he solves mysteries.
So cute. And then he uses that knowledge to solve mysteries. And he's got a female sidekick best friend named Sally, I believe.
I honestly have no remembrance of her.
Nope.
Sorry, Sally.
We would play Encyclopedia Brown on the playground.
I was very into Cam Jansen, which is exactly the same thing,
completely.
but
she's
memory.
click. Yeah. I love that.
Man.
This has been fun listening to.
Yeah.
Well, also I think it's a fun question in terms of this episode talking about the water dancer, because memory plays such a huge role in the powers in the book.
Agreed. So I'm glad we talked about this. And the second question is coming from Carol. What are their backgrounds and how did they get started in the business? They is us. So how did we get started?
Well, I came from the world of magazine editorial. So I worked first in bridal magazines and then at the Oprah magazine, actually doing books content at the Oprah magazine. Oprah herself picked The Water Dancer
Yes.
for her recent book club pick. And then I went to Glamour magazine, and I really miss talking about books all day long. So 4 years ago, I ended up here.
Emma, you want to go next?
I actually started after college my career in a law firm. It was the depths of the recession, and Obamacare did not exist yet, and your girl really needed health insurance. And I worked as a legal assistant for like 4 years before I got my first job at Penguin Random House and moved down to the city. And since coming here, I have worked in publicity, I have worked with the Speakers Bureau, I've worked in digital marketing, and now I'm in product. So I'm just sampling all of the careers
so many
here.
hats.
Exactly.
Emma can do everything. We can
That's
attest
one
to
way
that.
to interpret it. Thank you, Jess.
You're very welcome. I came into publishing and into digital marketing straight out of college. I would actually start as an intern here in my last semester, and then I never left, so you're all stuck with me. And it's been almost 3 years since then, so crazy.
Well, there you have it. There's a little bit about our career paths. But now I'm really itching to dive into this book.
Yes.
The Water Dancer, Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's been a book that's, I feel like, been on everyone's lips recently, thanks to Oprah, thanks to it being just such a beautiful novel. But what were your initial thoughts? Did the book sort of measure up to what you thought you were getting into?
Well, I will say one thing about The Water Dancer is I heard a lot about not just the existence of the book, but like what the book was about before I started reading it. And I kind of wish that I hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching this and you haven't read the book yet,
Stop.
Be warned anyway.
Spoilers.
Because the kind of elevator pitch for this book is Underground Railroad, but magic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to me, that is not what this book is about. And in fact, if you are in it for like the world building of the magic itself, that's one small but very important thread in the book, and it takes the whole book to play out.
Yeah.
And it was actually something that made me kind of trepidatious about this book, because I thought, well, if the Underground Railroad is magic, then does that erase the stories of the actual Underground Railroad? But I thought that Ta-Nehisi Coates did an incredible job of weaving together real details and the like true struggle with this idea of what memory means, what power that gives us, how that knowledge can set us free or keep us prisoners. So, in every book that is about magic, magic is in some way a metaphor, but I just appreciated when reading it how that metaphor was not all that the book was about.
Yeah. And I think it's, similar to how great historical fiction weaves in both actual historical details and fictional imagination. This was exactly like that, but just had one other thread in the plaid of the narrative.
That was good, Abby.
Thank you. That is the magical realism, thread, like whether it's the yellow or whatever. Just using her as my guide here. But it wasn't overpowering or only what you sort of get, right?
Yeah. I loved this book a lot, and the more I think about it, I think the more I just am in awe of the story that he created. I was hesitant at first because I sometimes get very easily confused with magical realism. I'm not always the biggest fan, I think. I think I like to be in either like a fully magical world or like a fully not. And so sometimes when they blend together, I'm just like, wait a minute, what is happening? And I have to read it like twice to understand. But going into this, I was like, is it going to be as good as I hear? And it really, really was. I think, like you said, the magical elements just amplify the already incredible story and depiction of the history that actually happened. So, yeah.
Well, and let's talk about Ta-Nehisi's writing style. I mean, what an astoundingly beautiful author.
So gorgeous.
Yeah.
I found myself, sometimes what I do when I read books that I really like, I take pictures of certain lines that like resonate with me, so I can look back and I'm just like, wow, that was just so gorgeous. And there was definitely like many moments throughout the books where I was just snapping pictures. My camera roll is like a ton of quotes.
I'm old, so I turn down my pages. Also, don't yell at me. I dog near my pages. Like, I don't want to hear about it. But you can see there are a bunch of dog ears in here.
Yeah.
Just stuff that I was like, I want to think about that again.
Totally.
I loved the slow burn of love for Sophia in the like beginning to middle of the book. There was one line where he started to realize that he really loved her. And it was when she was leaving, turning to just go, say goodbye. And he's like, I felt like a slow pain. And that's when I knew. You know? And I was just like, wow, that is so incredible.
And even when Hiram is only 19, he's like, I felt what at that time felt like love to me.
Exactly.
And, we know that there's so much more to gain from their relationship.
Well, and he so explicitly grapples with that as he moves through Virginia and up into Philadelphia as an agent of the underground. He even then still he talks about thinking of her as my Sophia, but his version of that does not reckon with Sophia the person so much as Sophia the idea, which I think was a very interesting thread of introspection, and one that people could still use a little of in their lives today. And so then, like, through his journey back to Virginia and back to Lockless and like all the way through the end of the book, I think that's really his coming of age. Even though he has been a man for so long, that's when he kind of comes into his own and figures out like what kind of man he wants to be in the world.
Well, I listened to Ta-Nehisi in conversation with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah Winfrey, ever heard of her?
On CBS Early Morning with Gayle King. I mean, talk about a powerhouse trio. But Ta-Nehisi shared this story that I really loved. He was like, when I was 19 or 20, I told my mom that I wanted to write her a novel one day. And his mom loves romance books. And on TV, he's like, Mom, I hope I'm not embarrassing you. But she loves romance books. And so I promised her I would write her one. And initially, when she was sort of halfway through, she's like, boy, this isn't a romance. She comes to, sort of realize that it is really a love story. But did you know as you were initially reading it that it was going to really evolve into a deep love story?
No, I really didn't suspect that at all. I don't think sometimes like the best love stories aren't romance novels though.
Right.
So I didn't think that going into it. I really didn't even see it as I was reading it, and then it kind of just evolved into that, and I fell in love with like the love story that he created.
And it's like the best love like is like right there in front of you and you don't really know it, and then it's like, oh, this is my God. Yeah. Okay, so one thing I thought was really interesting that I want to talk about is how Ta-Nehisi Coates uses the terms quality and tasked and then low for sort of the three societal levels, and also, you know, slaves and masters and sort of the lower class white people. I thought that was so interesting. What did you take from the use of these terms?
Well, much as you watched the Oprah Winfrey clip, I was listening to his interview with Terry Gross on Fresh Air on my way into work a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how that vocabulary, while not necessarily used by everyone or used in the same way that it is in the book, comes from contemporary accounts. And I thought that was really interesting. And I also thought that using words that were a little different than we're used to, but convey a very specific meaning, made the reader stop and think critically about what the roles were in society and why, and what was actually happening to these people who were tasked.
Yeah. Right, and I thought, you know, if you were enslaved, would you self-identify as that? Or, so these made sense to me as like from a slave's point of view, they are tasked with all sorts of things, and they are told that their masters are, you know, these are the quality people. So I could see from their worldview why these terms make sense, and so it's so interesting that they actually have historical implications and use.
Can you refresh my memory if the quality also refer to themselves as quality, or if it's just the enslaved people that go by this?
We only get it from Hirams' point of view.
Okay.
But I believe that the implication is that to whites, specifically to slave owners, but to all whites, it is unspoken.
Okay, interesting. That makes it like even more interesting to me. Did you like the use of these words, Abby?
I did. I thought it was very effective, and you know, you could sort of see the indoctrination of, you know, this is where I am, this is where you are, these are where the low whites are, you know, so this is how the structure is. It was very laid out, and sort of like, don't make any mistake about it.
Yeah.
This is how it is. So I thought that was effective. Once I sort of wrapped my head around like, oh, this means this, this means this. Same, this is so embarrassing to admit, but also same with the use of hi. In the beginning, I was like, oh, they're greeting each other all the time. Hi, 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 hi. And then I'm like, oh, this is short for Hiram. Okay. Yes, all right. It only took me about like 3 pages, maybe 5, to get that.
You're brave to admit that, too.
Thank you. Let me know if you also have done that. But yeah, so sort of once you can wrap your head around like, oh, this is the terminology we're using in this book, in this narrative, I got it.
You got it.
Yeah.
What did you think of the visions that Hiram had of his mother?
I mean, don't you love when you're reading a book and then you get to the point where you're like, oh, this is what the title means.
Right.
This is where the title comes from.
I love when I see the words appear on the page. I'm like, there it is. The water dance. Yes.
So, you know, I actually, that resonated a lot with me. As someone who has lost a parent, when you get like a flash of a memory, you know, whether it's invoked by a magical mist or not, when you get a flash of a memory that you haven't already worked over in your brain so many times that it feels like threadbare, it's almost like, what gift? Like, I hadn't thought about that in so long. Or like a smell will remind me of my dad, or a song especially. And so I totally, especially for Hiram, who was separated from his mom at a really young age, like 11, those moments must be few and far between, right? I really wanted to like see the water dance. He describes it so beautifully, and then when we see Sophia do it as well. But that was something that I'm like, can I YouTube this? Yeah.
Yes.
Did you?
You can YouTube anything.
Oh, that's true. I loved the image of his mother dancing with her sister, his
Emma,
aunt,
yeah.
and them just totally for a brief moment being happy and like losing themselves in this music and the dance. And I loved how music played a really like big role in their happiness. As somebody who is a musician, I see that as like a refuge, like something to turn to when everything else is awful.
Well, and that specific memory is at the root of Hirams Powers.
Right.
Yeah.
So when he returns to Virginia, returns to Lockless as an agent of the underground, but he is also replacing his father's former manservant, and he is giving information to the underground about his father's affairs, like the state of his estate. He also finds a shell necklace, which becomes his final talisman, tied specifically to his mother, that unlocks like the rest of his memories of her. Or I guess it was hard to say if it just unlocked the memory of their parting, but I think that was kind of like that opens the floodgates, I guess.
Right.
And then to then use that memory, or partially use that memory of his mother and his Aunt Emma water dancing as the way that he conducts Thena to freedom. I thought that was really beautiful, especially because Thena is his surrogate mother, and so to be able to use the memories of the mother who was taken from him to liberate the mother who stepped into that absence, I thought was really beautiful.
It was beautiful. I loved Thena. I thought she was great. I loved how she was a very hard woman, but softened at like Hiram's, touch and look, and
and I would love to know like what her reunion with her daughter was like, and what that story is beyond the end of this story.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I will say, like, that's how I know I really loved this book, because anytime we talk about a character who leaves the narrative, I want to know what happened in their life, because they're so finely drawn and well wrought that they seem like real people to me. And I want to know what happens to them when they're not on the page.
When you start wishing for like more for a character, that's when you know that you just loved this story.
Well, let's talk about the complexity of parenthood in this book, motherhood and fatherhood, Hiram's relation to Howell Walker, his father, though they're sort of, it's so interesting, I thought, that their parenthood, their relation is acknowledged by people. People know that Howell Walker is Hiram's father.
Yeah.
And yet, he will never be an equal son.
Right.
He would never be allowed to inherit his father's estate. But he is brought into the fold. So what did you think about the complexity of
their
those
relationship?
Yeah.
It was very sad in the beginning because Hiram really, all he wanted and dreamed of was to be seen by his father as more than just a tasked son. He had big dreams of like inheriting everything, and like one day, you know, his father would appreciate him for who he was, but instead what he got was this really like backwards complicated relationship with his father and Maynard. That's how you
Maynard, yeah.
And was always treated like just a, you know, person to watch out for his actual beloved son, who was a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
So it seemed like his father just used him when he found it convenient. It seems like he did recognize, you know, that he is special and smart, but he had no intention of ever offering him anything more, you know? And I think that's why Thena, in the beginning of the book, kind of told Hiram, he is not your father.
Yeah.
He is not your blood. Like, listen to me, you know? So it was sad. It was sad to see that relationship, like, just turn out the way it did. Yeah.
And what did you make of Howell's apology?
I mean, when I saw that discussion question, I wasn't even sure what it referred to.
Yeah.
It must be when he returns to Virginia in his old age, in Howell's old age, and Howell, I guess, expresses regrets to Hiram, but those regrets are always going to be within the lens of slavery.
Right.
Howell's most major regret is always going to be that Maynard died, that his way of life is dying.
Yeah.
That the soil's turning bad, you know, that all of these things.
So what was really more interesting to me in terms of familial relationships or parental relationships was between Sophia and Caroline. Because she is impregnated by Nathaniel, the white man who is Howell's brother, and that is the impetus for her to run.
Right.
And she says so, although Hiram doesn't understand it at the time, she says so to him explicitly. You know, these parental relationships between white slave owners and their slaves is how people like Sophia are kept enslaved. That is how they hold you down through your own children. That is how they control you. The threat of selling you or your children off. That is how they create more slaves for free to perpetuate the system. So that relationship to me was like more interesting, and I thought it brought up a lot of questions about the role of intersectionality in this world. And also, I think that Ta-Nehisi talks very cogently about the difference between how people like Corinne see the underground as a war and it has to be fought strategically, whereas people like Hiram, who are tasked or have been tasked, don't have the luxury of that removed. They are fighting for their own survival and for the survival of their loved ones. And so kind of the push and pull between a fight for systemic change and direct action for survival.
I totally agree.
I mean, let's talk about the Underground Railroad and Corinne and Georgie. Did you see that betrayal coming?
100%.
You did.
I knew the way that Georgie encouraged him to please not like do this, to go home, to find a wife and just like settle down. He said it so many times. I think Georgie didn't want to do it. I think he really liked Hiram, but obviously he had his own family to think about, and I'm sure he's trapped in all these different kinds of obligations. But yeah, I saw it coming when Georgie was like, okay, fine, like meet me here. I was like, don't do it, don't go, like this is a trap. And I wished that that Hiram and Sophia just did it like alone,
on their own. Yeah, it was so interesting. I mean, Corinne also, risks her life to work for the Underground Railroad, but sort of allows Hiram to come to harm. And so there's, even still working for the same aims, it's never really equal, right?
And it never can be.
right?
Because they have different things
Two
at stake.
separate, yeah, exactly.
Well,
I think it's safe to say we all really loved this book.
yes.
Beautifully written.
And one that I would go back to again. I feel like you'll continue to pick up nuggets that you missed the first time, the first reading. Actually,
I agree.
Oprah said she read it twice.
Well, if Oprah read it twice,
We
I
have
better
to.
get cracking.
Yeah.
Exactly. So thank you both so much for discussing this beautiful book, and we hope you guys enjoyed it as well.
We have one other thing to do before we end.
Oh my gosh, okay.
We did hold another contest this month for people
good.
to ask questions and enter to win our December book club pick.
Oh.
Yeah, so we have to pick a winner
Okay.
and just talk a little bit about their question. So I think Barbara is our winner.
Oh, congrats,
And we did
Barbara.
kind of touch on this already, but she asked, what did the magical realism add to the story? So again, we did talk about this a little in the beginning, but I think personally that the magical realism was just, like I said before, a way to like amplify what was already there and take something very tragic from her past and just sprinkle a little bit of magic. So, I thought it made it stronger and didn't take away from the history that we need to remember.
I think as a device, it really focuses the reader's attention in a way that a straight historical fiction version of this story might not have, because what is great about stories that have a magical realism element or a science fiction or fantasy element is that you can make your metaphors corporeal, if that makes sense. Like, for example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is just a show about high school and how hard it is to like be an adolescent and grow up. But because it is a show with monsters, the things that you battle when you are a teenager can be literal monsters that you actually fight. And I think that is what magical realism brings to this book. You can be more obvious about what you are saying because it gives you a different way in.
Yeah.
Plus, it's fun. It's
It
fun
is
to read.
fun. Creates a
know.
little mystery.
I mean, to answer this, I want to just read the quote that's on the back of the book.
Yeah.
So it's in Hiram's voice, and it says, "I'm here telling this story, and not from the grave, not yet, but from the here and now, peering back into another time when we were tasked and close to the earth, and close to a power that baffled the scholars and flummoxed the quality, a power like our music, like our dance, that they cannot grasp because they cannot remember." So a lot of
powerful.
this, the magical realism for me was tied to how magical and baffling our memories are, how magical music is, how magical dance is, the expression of emotion in a physical form. So for me, all of those elements felt magical in this book. And so it didn't seem out of place for me.
Yeah. And how much is there to grasp in this one sentence? So, like, this is just throughout the entire book, and it really does make me want to read it all over again. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara,
Thank
for
you.
your question. Thank you to all of you for reading along with us this month. And we can't wait to see you in December.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.